What's up, Ego Hackers? Welcome to the C.S. Joseph Podcast Premium Edition for the Journeyman members. And this is Season 32, Episode 10, the 4 Octagram variants of the ISTP. And obviously I am recording from my car in the darkness. Kind of had to because the only way I was able to get any remote privacy. And got a really bad sunburn right now. I'm hurting. So just trying to do this properly or do it right in the midst of having a crazy ass sunburn. So anyway, as usual, we explain what exactly the Octagram is. And the Octagram is basically the Ego Hacker community's version of the Enneagram. Whereas the Enneagram is nature and nurture combined in some capacity. The Octagram is just nurture only. We had to do this because of all of the false positives and the confusion that the Enneagram is actually bringing to a lot of people. And that's not to say that the Enneagram doesn't have something to it. It really does. I mean, I'm an Enneagram 7, for example. At least that's what I'm told. And yeah, I am kind of an enthusiast. I get it. But the problem with the Enneagram is that people like to combine MBTI, Jungian analytical psychology, with the nature-based psychology that's stored within the Enneagram, and the Enneagram also has nurture. So it ends up just creating an amalgamation that's not exactly entirely accurate. And it doesn't really actually address the variants or the subtypes that are relating to the Octagram themselves, which is like the 4 variants of the Octagram, which is subconscious developed, subconscious focused, or subconscious developed, unconscious focused, or unconscious developed, subconscious focus, or unconscious developed, unconscious focus, and so on and so forth. So based on that approach, subtypes are definitely a real thing. I mean, obviously, we talk about Dave Powers and objective personality system, but he's maintaining that his 512 different subtypes are actually based in nature, and that's not necessarily true, because from his perspective, each individual cognitive function can have a perspective from which it could be utilized in 512 different perspectives total that are available to the human psyche. Now, while I do agree with that premise, the problem is that it's not actually a psyche doing it, because you are in that position for like even a split second, throughout the day. It's not something that you can hold on to entirely. And a lot of people are just not entirely, sure about how that works or why it works to that end. But anyway, Octagram is the interpretation of how nurture impacts our nature. There are 4 paths of nurtural development. Whereas Enneagram tries to combine nurture with a bit of nature, the Octagram is a pure nature separated from nurture, Octagram is pure nurture separated from nature, but demonstrating how nurture shapes the expression of our nature. The Octagram reveals the 4 nuanced expressions of each type. Octagram is also our version of subtypes and details why each subtype or variant expresses themselves differently. So again, it's really just a tool that we use to measure human nurture. That's the whole point behind it. That's why we do it. Now, how is the Octagram formed? And this is something that we've discussed many times in the Cutting Edge episode for December 2022, which is the episode devoted to soft locking. Please watch that episode before you guys watch this season, for season 32, because it will help you. It goes in deep on what soft locking actually is and how soft locking is this process by which a person's Octagram is created. Because as soon as anyone uses a certain cognitive function in your midst, your cognitive functions are going to react to their functions, and then how your functions are used, be it chaotically or orderly, it creates neural pathways in your brain and actually shapes your brain over time. That's literally how it works, okay? It shapes your brain over time. So, environment plus soft locking. Our environment forces us to prefer one side of the mind over the other. Our family, communities, and life experiences, we face pressure our brains through neuroplasticity to adapt to our new environment, or any environment for that matter. Soft locking is the engine for octagram and neural development. Environment either enables or disables the expression of our ego. If you cannot express your ego fully in your environment, the pressure will lead you to other sides of your mind. However, your psyche is always still trying to achieve its cognitive origin, even from a different side of the mind. Soft locking refines your ego, which is ego enablement, or expands it, which is ego disablement, forcing expansion to the other sides of the mind. Soft locking is the result of your life circumstances pushing you along the path to enlightenment. And what is enlightenment? Enlightenment is basically this thing known as cognitive integration. But in order for you to reach cognitive integration, which basically means you become a complete human being with a complete psyche instead of this incomplete psyche that we have, you've grown your psyche well enough that you are entirely integrated and you have access to all of your cognitive functions within all four sides of your mind using both of the gateway and guidance circuit throughout, right? For more on gateway versus guidance circuit, I highly recommend you check out our course, Ego Hacking Your Fear, at egohackingyourfear.com. The masterclass is definitely around the corner. So, also, a thing about soft locking, an example of soft locking is, if you're a TI hero, right? You're an ISTP. You could actually soft lock other people just by sharing your thoughts. Because another person's extroverted thinking is going to have to latch on to your thoughts in order for them to be able to understand what they're saying. But because your TI hero is an optimistic function, they have to respond with an extroverted thinking function that is also optimistic, which means it would have to be a hero or a child or a nemesis or a trickster function. The problem is, though, is that if those functions are not available, what's going to happen is it's going to force cognitive transition in the other person, orderly or chaotic, into another side of their mind in order to produce the missing function. So let's say if they had extroverted thinking child in their superego, an ISTP using a TI hero would basically soft lock me into my superego, basically. And it would actually cause me to get closer and closer to unconscious focus as a result of interacting with an ISTP, right? And that's ultimately where it comes from. That being said, your nature archetype plus origin divided by soft locking equals octagram. ISTPs are ultimately seeking validation, which is their cognitive origin, which is all about accuracy, correctness, reliability of thought and judgment, refinement through education and teaching, and providing the emotional support to uphold those in adversity. Paradigm shifts, such as moving out of your house, taking on a new lover, changing careers or jobs, or having a child, or starting over in a new city, often force paradigm shifts in your psyche, changing your cognitive focus. This means that cognitive focus is far more variable, whereas cognitive development is far more static. This is often why childhood determines cognitive development and adolescence determines your first cognitive focus. As you age and circumstances change, your focus changes along with it, okay? So cognitive focus, it's very malleable, it's very variable, it actually changes throughout your life. Whereas cognitive development, it doesn't really change. I mean, it can change if you suffer a brain injury or brain trauma. And interesting, I was actually talking to an ISTP earlier today who did suffer brain trauma. And it'll be very interesting to know how their cognitive development basically went as a result of that situation. So hopefully I get the opportunity to actually find out more information about that and present that to the audience in the near future. But I find that very fascinating. Ultimately, how that works. So, but yeah, validation is everything to the ISTP, and ultimately, like, your octagram is, with your neutral expression, is basically a tool that your brain uses to actually fulfill its cognitive origin. And ISTPs crave validation. Validation is absolutely everything to them. They like to be liked. They want people to ask them for help to solve problems, etc. And that's why that's a really big deal. A very, very big deal. Very important. So as a result, there are 4 variants of the ISTP. And those 4 variants are, like we said before, SDSF, SDUF, UDSF, and UDUF. All right, so the first one is SDSF, which is obstinance plus humility, which is basically certainty is earned. That is the theme of the SDSF ISTP. So SDSF ISTPs are hyperdeveloped in their ENFJ subconscious. They believe that character is built up through teaching, as the ENFJ subconscious is expressed via the soul temple, through the soul temple influence on the four sides of the mind. The SDSF ISTP's own identity may be drawn from being a teacher. Their sense of worth is likely drawn from how effective a teacher they think they are. But to actually go a little bit further than this, what's really interesting about ISTPs is that how they learn. It's really interesting how they learn, because oftentimes I've noticed ISTPs being really, really slow learners. Oftentimes not even having the patience to read a book. And they always want to do hands-on. The thing is, though, is that if they can facilitate group activities where they're learning a skill that they've never learned before, but then they actually attempt to teach other people how to use, a particular skill, basically, even though they don't know what that skill is, they actually learn that skill rapidly because they're seeing how the other person reacts to them, quote, helping the other person actually learn, said skill. And then that basically ends up becoming the shared experience that ISTPs actually use to learn skills. And that's why SDSF ISTPs pick up skills very quickly, because they're constantly in teaching mode. The ISTP is known as the jack of all trades, and especially if they're SDSF, they really can go out of their way to pick up skill after skill after skill after skill after skill after skill very quickly, only because they're consistently maintaining this enabling environment where they are able to teach other people, or at least to promote some kind of shared learning environment when it comes to a certain skill. And it actually increases their effectiveness, their own personal ability, their own personal performance when it comes to utilizing their skills or even adopting new skills over time. It's really fascinating to watch. So SDSF ISTPs were likely enabled to solve problems and receive appreciation for their thoughts in at least one of their childhood environments. They likely found others who welcomed the ISTP's thoughts and criticisms and saw that their thoughts and criticisms as help. And this is where people would go up to the ISTP and be like, hey, I have this problem. Can you help me? Can you solve this issue? And that's very validating to an ISTP. Absolutely validating. And for the SDSF ISTP, certainty is earned. Others who expect their thoughts to be accepted by default tend to lose the ISTP's respect. And that's the thing about ISTPs, is that they don't know the consequences of their actions due to expert intuition trickster. However, while that is the case, and while that is definitely true, they do understand that there is still an outcome that they themselves are actually looking for themselves with their NI child. And even NI child, because it's optimistic, it still has an air of certainty about it, similar to introvert intuition hero as a result. It's all about being able to get an outcome that they're looking for. And yeah, sure, the ISTP is progression-based. They're always walking that journey. However, their ENFJ side and their ESTJ side are both in-charge structure types, which are all outcome-based. So ultimately, they have to get to a point where they're comfortable or actually willing to admit that they need some level of certainty in order for them to be able to move forward in their lives. They need some kind of goal to go forth towards. It's really important, right? Whereas the ISFP, not as much because of ESFJ's shadow, but with the ISTP, it's absolutely central. They need goals to look forward to on a regular basis. And this is something that Chris Taylor actually taught me about ISTPs last year. It's just to, lay a bunch of goals in front of them and just keep feeding them goals over time. And you have to, because they need to be that NI child needs to be led in some capacity, or at least have something to look forward to. Because without that hope of that NI child, and if they don't even have the freedom to hope, they end up succumbing to their vice of melancholy, and then all the joy is sucked out. And this is where SDSF ISTPs absolutely structure their entire life around avoiding that entirely. It's always maximum joy and they always make sure that they have their freedom such that they're able to exercise their freedom in that capacity to guarantee that joy. And because without being able to guarantee it, there's nothing really else to live for, basically. And SDSF ISTPs really struggle the most with their freedom threatened. Like, these are the people that if you were to put in jail, they'd basically commit suicide, essentially. And that would really suck for them. But again, they realize that they have to work hard in order for them to gain any certainty whatsoever, which is also important. So SDSF ISTPs may come across like unconscious focused, like pride, and variance because of their obstinance and their seeming assurance of their own TI. Sometimes they can be very obstinate, which basically just means they want to be proven wrong. Because until they're proven wrong, they are correct. It's not necessarily pride, it's just that until they have absolute concrete evidence that they are incorrect, they're going to continue with the working knowledge that they have that they are correct until proven otherwise. This actually can bite ISTPs in the butt constantly and consistently. But at the same time, as long as they're willing to listen and become the student instead of the teacher, oftentimes the ISTP is forced against their will throughout their life to be the student, oftentimes, which enables them to be great teachers later in life. But until that happens, that obstinance is getting in the way. And it's like, hey, until you can prove me wrong, I'm right. So we're going to assume I'm correct until you can prove me wrong, basically. And SDSF ISTPs require that. They absolutely have to have that in order to move forward within their own lives. So humility for the ISTP is not necessarily open-mindedness, such as willingness to entertain possibilities, but without a willingness to question what they already think they know. So it is about they question what they think they already know, which is nice, in terms of the humility issue. They're willing to question that. Okay, yeah, maybe I'm not always correct all the time, which is helpful. However, don't expect SDSF ISTPs to dive into philosophical inquiry just because they have humility. Because what they care about at the end of the day is just what works. And, morality sometimes gets in the way, and doing the right thing just gets in the way of actually getting the job done. And even those things can actually rob the ISTP of joy. The joy that they have when crafting a solution and then implementing that solution. Because if they always follow the rules, it's either going to give them the certainty or the outcome that they don't want, or a lackluster one, or they weren't able to create a more efficient way to get the same thing done, basically, because they're always all about optimization, right? So SDSF ISTPs tend to welcome challenges to their beliefs, especially when quality research is being presented and pointed questions are being asked. Yeah, and that's literally just, because of their obstinance. They're just trying to come up with something different from their obstinance, because they know that they've spent a lot of time investment in their thinking and what they believe is true and what they think is true. And for that knowledge tower to be completely knocked down and for them to start over, it actually is a direct assault on their pride, and it really, really actually can harm them. They end up basically feeling worthless to a point. So they are very overprotective of that, and that's why they are obstinate. Again, I am right until you prove me wrong. Good luck. That kind of perspective, which is oftentimes definitely what SDSF ISTPs are all about. Now, for the remember, SDSF ISTPs are all about the joy energy. Now we'll talk about SDUF ISTPs, which is a temporary mind state, because we realize that unconscious focus is actually a temporary mind state. It's not a long-term mind state. A long-term mind state is subconscious focus. The mind is always trying to get back to subconscious focus whenever possible. But for the SDUF is all about decay energy, and decay energy comes from they had a great childhood but then a lousy adulthood, where they see that they were so enabled as a child that they were really immature, and that immaturity disabled their ability to function well as adults, right? And so SDUF ISTPs is known as obstinance plus pride, which is old skills will not increase my authority. So SDUF ISTPs were enabled in their early environment, finding some circle that welcomed their thoughts and enabled their freedom. SDUF ISTPs may have viewed themselves as the teacher or the most helpful person in their childhood, but their thoughts and helpfulness were likely not as welcomed or they may not have become a big fish in a small pool, being a teacher for skills that were not respected, like being a skilled video gamer to a point. Old skills do not increase my authority. Or basically those skills were either lost due to lack of practice or because they weren't given enough freedom to be able to have the time to be able to focus crafting a particular skill. SDUF ISTPs oftentimes feel set up for failure when it comes to learning their skills over time. And these folks really struggle with facilitating those groups of people from which they can do shared learning to be able to pick up skills rapidly because, again, they just feel disabled in their adulthood. The journey of the SDUF ISTP is to focus more on the body-temple integration of their skills and teaching. What have you achieved? What are you going to leave behind? What experience do you actually have? The unconscious focus, the ESTJ focus, is, among other things, about gathering more respect for themselves, more authority. This comes from how ISTPs always have Dunning-Kruger syndrome, because extroverted thinking nemesis is this thing where they are worried that they are not credible enough, worried that they do not have enough credentials or certificates or diplomas, whatever it may be, some kind of academic achievement, and they're worrying about the lack of academic achievement, when the reality is they're the smartest person in the room, and they don't require academic achievement because they can just figure everything out on the fly because they're so tactical that way and very tactile, as a result. So SDUF ISTPs often elect themselves as the teachers of things they know nothing about. The pull of the ESTJ shadow is to become more studied and more accomplished in the ISTP's desired field, and this field could be as general as just getting more life experience. These are also the ISTPs that interrupt what other people are doing because they think they could do it better, even though they've never actually done it before. And ISTPs typically do that, like they'll interrupt what other people and just do it for them to solve their problem for them, which is not something I would ever suffer in a woman. But ISTPs, regardless of gender, do that on a consistent basis because they make the assumption, whereas the other person may have an entirely different route to solve the problem, and it may actually be more creative than the ISTPs, or it may even be more efficient than the ISTPs' approach. It is actually possible. But oftentimes SDUF ISTPs are entirely blind to that and will just do it to the point where they think, oh, I can figure it out, even though they don't actually have any previous experience, utilizing that skill, which can be a big issue. The unconscious focus pull is also siphoning in energy from the superego, where the ISTP needs to integrate the heart-temple passion of pursuing the skills that actually excite the ISTP and expand their freedom of expression. And the other thing is that ISTPs that are SDUF, they have this thing where they are constantly testing everyone else's ideas. And SDUF ISTPs are very contrarian. They will provide challenge for the sake of challenge because they just want to know whether or not the idea that they're checking out really has any credence, whether or not it actually matters. So, whereas like the SDSF ISTP is a little bit more accepting of other people's ideas until proven wrong, the SDUF ISTP is actually not accepting of other people's ideas until proven right, basically. And it's still very frustrating to have to deal with. It's really frustrating. But that's because they have that decay energy in them in terms of SDUF. It's all about that decay and testing out ideas and testing integrity things and seeing what's left over. They're all about deconstructing something to see what the base pieces are to find any value or use in it, basically. That is decay energy for SDUF, and that's how ISTPs utilize it. Now, for the UDSF ISTP, which is accommodation plus humility, experience is the best teacher. This is statistically the most successful of the 4 octagram variants of the ISTP because the UDSF energy is all about hope. And hope springs eternal, and hope always gets through, as is entirely, necessary for ISTPs to learn and go all about. So, as a result of that, UDSF ISTPs were disabled in their early environment, forcing them to stretch their ESTJ shadow. They had to lead with their endurance, as there was unlikely any space for their freedom. Endurance was survival. UDSF ISTPs also likely lead with achievement, perhaps academic, to be, quote, validated, or at least to gain credibility within the context of their early environment. These are the ISTPs that actually have good grades, essentially, right? UDSF ISTPs can be among the best students of all the types, and they are insanely good students. The thing is that while they are good students, they still learn best in that shared learning environment, but UDSF ISTPs are independent enough to actually sit down and read a book on their own, take notes on it, and actually ponder it, and actually consider what's being taught from the books. So UDSF, best students. So UD ISTPs also value others' personal experience more so than their SD counterparts. The ESTJ shadow accommodation pole is more likely to listen to those who have relevant experience. And I'll be honest, I love how accommodating a UD ISTP is. It's so good. It's so great. I love it. I love the accommodation. And I really do love UDSF ISTPs. Accommodation, humility. It's so sweet. It's so good. It's sweet to the taste. It's absolutely fantastic. Really, really fantastic to have that as a result. So UD ISTPs also, so accommodation also makes the UD ISTPs more adaptable to others in teaching, relationships, career, and hobbies. The other thing is it really makes this variant of ISTP a very good listener. And when they are great listeners, that means they will become great teachers. And this route basically is the route to success. It is the highest route for happiness for an ISTP to go for. But again, these are the people who had those really bad childhoods, but then ended up becoming late bloomers anyway, right? This is the UDSF way because they just clung to hope no matter what. Having a basis of authority in their ESTJ shadow allows them to build a more stable identity of a teacher in their soul temple. So it's like, hey, I worked really hard to get these academic achievements. I'm actually certified. And because I have these achievements, I have a lot more freedom to express and expand my skills within this particular skill set area of study that I've had. And they realize that, having that additional credibility, having that additional authority is what actually enables them to be listened to by other people because they were such great listeners in their youth or when they were younger. It's absolutely necessary, to know that. Let's see here. Let's double check my notes. So through continued achievement and continuing to expand life experience, UDSF ISTPs can create their own validation, which is absolutely necessary because when you consider introverted feeling demon, the problem with introverted feeling demon is that oftentimes, ISTPs rely too heavily on external validation through extroverted feeling inferior instead of internal validation through introverted feeling demon. When it goes angelic mode, the ISTP basically learns to be their own source of self-acceptance, which is amazing and should be done because it actually has an ability to protect themselves because then they're not chasing after external validation their whole lives and potentially leaving themselves open to attack or manipulation by other people. So it's really important to be aware of that concept and why that ultimately happens as a result. Most people are entirely unaware of how that can actually play out, but the UDSF ISTP superpower is being the source of their own validation and being able to feed themselves basically without having to rely on anyone else. It really is a mark of, healthy independence instead of dependence on other people, which is something that an ISTP really just doesn't want to deal with. But because they're willing to have the self-discipline to deal and the grit to deal with, all that area of study in their lives, they're able to get to this point and actually become far more successful than they were previously, which is awesome. And then we have UDUF ISTPs, which is the despair variant of ISTPs, which is accommodation and pride, where validation is only for those who are tested or for those who are challenged, right? So I'm going to challenge you, and then after challenging you, only then will you be valid. We have to test every little inch of it to see if it is valid. But if there's any failure, if there's any crack, then the whole thing is just entirely worthless and you're stupid zoned, right? Like if there is a flaw in your logic, you are instantly stupid zoned. You are not even a consideration. And that is accommodation pride. UDUF ISTPs were completely disabled in their early environment. Their thoughts were likely not welcome, and appreciation was given to others in their environment. They never really got any gratitude whatsoever, and they had their freedom taken away on a regular basis. Abuse and or trauma were likely childhood conditions UDUF ISTPs end up having. Stretched to extract some appreciation or worth, they dove completely into their ESTJ shadow, looking for respect and authority through achievement. These are the ISTPs that ultimately felt powerless in their upbringing and struggling with those feelings of powerlessness, which is what the ESTJ and the INFP dyad is doing within their four sides of the mind, looking for the cognitive origin of authority. People look for the cognitive origin of authority because they feel powerless. And ultimately, that's what happened to these ISTPs. They felt powerless their entire lives, not just their childhood, but also their adulthood at the same time. If I won't be appreciated, maybe I can be respected. This is the call of ESTJ shadow. And it's like, okay, well, if no one's going to give me gratitude, no one's going to make me a priority, no one's going to give me special treatment, well, then I'm going to make sure everyone respects me then instead, right? I'm going to make sure that I have an authority to be able to control other people in my life, because I can control people into validating me. I can enslave people and force people to validate me, or I could force people to like me, or they don't have to like me, but they have to work for me. I can still extract favors from them, but it doesn't matter if they like me or not. That approach. Unlike the UDSF, however, UDUF ISTPs dive even deeper into their INFP superego. There they develop principles that enable their hyper-independence, but also make them more ingenious in their expression. But the INFP superego is really about personal expression and artistry. UDUF ISTPs siphon in the heart temple influence through introverted feeling demon and can become incredible artists of various kinds, which is absolutely true. In fact, like even recording artists do the same thing to that regard. I think Chris Cornell might be on that list. And then also, what was that guy's name? Trent Reznor? Maybe Trent Reznor? I could be wrong. These guys might be ESTPs, not ISTPs. But there are a few amazing ISTP recording artists out there who absolutely were UDUF and did achieve these things because of their amazing, ingenious expression. It's likely that many famous ISTP performers, musicians, actors, and artists are UDUF, or worse, for significant portions of their life. And actually, they draw upon their pain actually as the engine or the source for their expression, their artistic expression. Their accommodation and pride values the battle-tested, just as they value their own survival. Because remember, UDUF as a mind state in terms of the Octagram is all about survival. UDUF ISTPs can be great teachers, but tend to have more flair. In some ways, they are even more adaptable to others than their UDSF counterparts. And yes, they can be great teachers, but what I have noticed about UDUF ISTPs is that they have a tendency to actually teach one person at a time. Because that hyper survival independence that comes from a UDUF individual, and they take on basically an apprentice one at a time. They're not really into very large groups of people. It's more of a one at a time base, because it's as if this ISTP is basically becoming an oracle for one person. That INFP superego oracle, or that professor coming from their ESTJ shadow. But it's not really based on a quantity of people. It's about a quality person that they are planning on investing and offering their tutelage to, basically. So the UDUF ISTP, authority is given to those whose ideas have gone through fire and whose values have survived under great pressure. Survival is valid. And this is the thing, like UDUF ISTPs really only come to value fellow survivors, basically, and oftentimes end up in attachment-based relationships with other UDUF subvariants of people, which can be actually really sad if you think about it, because it's just creating an endless cycle of despair, and they end up keeping people in despair and themselves also being trapped by despair and never actually making it to subconscious focus because there's just an entire lack of hope, which absolutely sucks if you think about it. So UDUF also, these people are also, they're very prideful, and the reason why they're prideful is because they're trying to cover up their insecurity. They're trying to cover up the fact that they know that they just weren't accepted, and they actually have this introverted sensing, shadow, and superego approach where they actually expect other people to not validate them. They expect other people to not like them, and I've noticed that they can be really self-deprecating in certain cases, but also on top of the self-deprecation, they just expect people to not like them, so they will treat those people by default as if those people do not like them, even though there's no evidence to the contrary. And UDUF ISTPs oftentimes end up setting up these people for failure on a regular basis. It's really sad to see. And it just bothers me so much how they also dig in their heels from that perspective. And sure, they can be really, really accommodating, but really they go to their pride for their protection, essentially. And it's like, yeah, I'm going to accommodate you until my ego is bruised. I'm going to accommodate you, but only if after you've proven to me that you're actually someone who does value me in some process, because they're going to, it's like they have this guilty until proven innocent approach when it comes to other people in their life. And it's like the auto stupid zoning, or the auto mistrust, or the auto like, hey, I'm not really going to listen to anything you have to say here because I cannot expose myself to you because my pride's going to get hurt, because my pride is the only thing getting me through in life, because it's the only thing that is protecting me right now, right? And it's because they just don't want to admit that no one likes them or liked them in the past. And it's even harder for them to admit that now they're creating the self-fulfilling prophecy of pushing people away because they're just assuming that nobody likes them, which ends up actually being entirely alienating. And then it actually makes them become even more melancholy over time because they struggle between joy versus melancholy. Social engineering implications of the octagram. If cognitive origin never changes, like validation, regardless of development and focus, then giving them their origin through their preferred poles is the best way to reach them. So for ISTPs, the accommodation unconscious development pole is best met when you make your needs known to the ISTP. They're trying to make you comfortable so they can be comfortable. Reward them with appreciation and freedom for their accommodation. The obstinance subconscious development pole is best met with sharp questions and delivering options backed by sources that the ISTP agrees are credible. They use obstinance to protect them from being wrong or harming others. The other thing is that obstinate ISTPs really, really appreciate people who go to the high level of effort of research in an effort to prove them wrong. Because the amount of respect that they will show to that person, it will linger. It will be there basically indefinitely. Because the ISTP will see that person as one of the very few people in their life that is actually capable of proving them incorrect. And actually has shown them that they might actually be wrong. And that is absolutely insanely valuable to an obstinance-based ISTP. And they value those people, their FID will value those people basically forever, because it's like, wow, you were actually able to correct me. And not very many people can, but you actually did, right? Whereas from the accommodation thing, it's just more of it's just positive reinforcement. Just slam them with a lot of positive reinforcement, and you basically got them. I mean, that is in effect how that works, or how that happens, or that's ultimately the point. So yeah, and just remember, UDUF ISTPs, it's all about that despair energy, and they are despairing over the fact that no one liked them, or no one, and they had no freedom. And again, they just walk around with this assumption that their freedom is already being taken away, that everyone's angle is to basically, it's not so much shame them, but guilt them. Like, people are out to guilt them. People are out to take away their freedom. And they just assume that about everyone in their life until proven otherwise. They're actually, they lack giving other people the benefit of the doubt. And that's really sad if you actually consider the long-term implications or the long-term consequences from the ISTP point of view. When they do that from a UDUF perspective, they are in effect setting up other people for failure, and then when those people do fail, they condemn those people after the fact. which actually is a thing that happens with the ESTPs as well. But this is how it manifests within the the perspective of the ISTP from this point of view, because it's like, hi, I'm going to accommodate you into failing me, and it's like, well, wait a minute, what the hell is that all about? So. But yeah, folks, that's it for season 32, episode 10. Thank you all for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys next month for episode 11 and 12, the INTJ and the INFJ Octagram lectures. See you then.